The night Evelyn Mercer arrived at the Boone Ranch, she made one promise to herself. Her children would not starve, even if she had to bleed into the dirt to feed them. The stagecoach driver wouldn't even look at her when he dumped their trunk in the dust. 2 days' ride from anything resembling civilization, standing before a ranch that looked more like a prison than salvation, she had exactly $3 and a dead husband's pocket watch. Colter Boone stood on his porch with arms crossed, face carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountains behind him. He didn't want them there. She didn't care. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this journey travels. The ranch foreman wouldn't shake her hand. Evelyn stood in the yard with Clara pressed against her skirts and Eli hiding behind her, waiting for someone to acknowledge they existed. 5 men sat on the bunkhouse steps, watching her like she was a peculiar insect that had wandered into their world by mistake. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Just stared. The silence had weight. It pressed down on her shoulders, made the August heat feel even more suffocating. She'd been standing there for 10 minutes while Colter Boone disappeared into the main house without a word of instruction, without telling anyone what to do with the woman and children he'd just inherited through the loosest possible definition of family obligation. Her husband's second cousin, a man she'd never met, a man who, according to the single letter he'd sent after Daniel's death, had no interest in charity cases but supposed she could stay until she figured something out. She had nothing to figure out. This was it. "Ma'am?" One of the ranch hands finally stood. He was young, maybe 20, with sunburned skin peeling across his nose. "There's a... Mr. Boone said you could use the storage room. Out back." Storage room. Evelyn had lived in 14 different places since marrying Daniel. A boarding house in St. Louis that smelled like boiled cabbage. A railroad camp where the walls were canvas and the floors were mud. A 2-room apartment above a butcher shop where blood smells seeped through the floorboards. She'd grown accustomed to accommodations that matched their financial reality. But a storage room. "Show me," she said. The young man, he'd introduced himself as Tommy, or maybe Timmy, she couldn't remember through the exhaustion, led them around the main house. It was a sprawling structure built from rough-hewn logs that had weathered to the color of old bones. Functional. Graceless. The kind of building that existed purely because shelter was a requirement for survival, not because anyone had put thought into making it pleasant. The storage room was attached to the back like an afterthought. Tommy pushed open the door, and the smell hit her immediately. Dust. Mildew. Something that might have been dead mice. "There's no window," Clara said. Evelyn's heart seized. Her daughter hadn't spoken in 4 months, not since the day they buried Daniel, not since she'd watched her father's coffin lowered into Missouri dirt while a preacher who'd never met him recited empty words about eternal rest. Clara looked up at her, eyes wide and frightened, and Evelyn saw the hope dying in real time as her daughter retreated back into silence. "We'll cut one," Evelyn said firmly. "A window. We'll cut a window right there." She pointed at the wall. "Let the light in." Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "I don't think Mr. Boone would. Then he can tell me himself he'd prefer we live in darkness." She stepped into the room. It was maybe 10 feet by 12, crammed with broken tools, empty crates, saddles that needed repair. Cobwebs hung in the corners like rotting lace. The floor was dirt, packed hard from years of neglect. But it had walls. It had a roof. It had a door that closed. She'd make it work. "Help me move these crates," she told Tommy. He hesitated, glancing back toward the main house like he expected Colter Boone to appear and forbid basic human decency. When no one materialized, he stepped inside and started shifting the heavier items. Eli finally emerged from behind Evelyn's skirts. He was 8 years old, small for his age, with his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin. He picked up a broken rake handle and dragged it outside with exaggerated effort, trying to be useful. It took an hour to clear the room. By the time they finished, Evelyn's dress was soaked through with sweat, her hands black with grime. Clara sat on an overturned bucket outside, watching ants march across the dirt in elaborate formations. Eli had discovered a barn cat and was attempting to befriend it despite the animal's obvious hostility. "There's a pump around front," Tommy said, wiping his forehead. "For washing. And the bunkhouse kitchen. We eat there, all of us. Mr. Boone, too, usually. Breakfast is at 5, dinner at 6. I guess you're welcome to join. The way he said it made it clear she was not, in fact, welcome. Thank you, Evelyn said anyway. Tommy nodded and escaped, practically jogging back toward the safety of the bunkhouse, where men understood the rules and women didn't complicate everything just by existing. Evelyn stood in the doorway of her new home and felt the weight of reality settle over her like a burial shroud. This was it. This was the end of the line. No more running, no more hoping the next town would be better, no more pretending she had options. She had 2 children, $3, and a storage room. Mama? Eli appeared at her elbow, the hostile cat somehow now purring in his arms. Are we staying here? Yes. Forever? She looked down at her son, at the hope and fear warring in his expression, and she lied. Just until we get back on our feet. He nodded, satisfied with the answer, even though both of them knew there were no feet left to stand on. That night, Evelyn spread their bedrolls on the dirt floor and tried not to think about the storage room in Missouri where she'd kept her wedding china. They ate the last of the hard bread she'd packed, drank water that tasted like iron, and pretended this was an adventure. Clara fell asleep first, curled on her side with one fist tucked under her chin. Eli lasted longer, staring at the ceiling, which was really just the underside of the main house's floorboards, until exhaustion pulled him under. Evelyn sat with her back against the wall and let herself cry for exactly 5 minutes. Then she stopped, wiped her face, and started making plans. She woke before dawn, a habit formed from years of cooking breakfast for Daniel before he left for whatever backbreaking job he'd managed to find. The children were still asleep. She could hear them breathing in the darkness, the soft sounds of life continuing despite everything trying to crush it. The main house was silent when she slipped inside through the back door. She'd expected to find the kitchen empty, but Coulter Boone sat at a rough wooden table, drinking coffee in the dim light of a single lantern. He looked up when she entered, didn't speak, just watched her with those cold, evaluating eyes. "I'll cook breakfast," Evelyn said, not asking permission, stating fact. "We have a cook." "Where is he?" Coulter gestured vaguely toward the bunkhouse. "Sleeping, probably. Riley doesn't start until 5. "Then I'll wake him, or I'll do it myself." "You don't—" "I need to earn our keep," Evelyn interrupted. "I understand you didn't ask for us. I understand we're an inconvenience, but we're here, and I will not be a burden." Something flickered across Coulter's face. Surprise, maybe. Or annoyance. It was hard to tell with a man who seemed to have forgotten how to express human emotion. He was maybe 40, with the kind of weathered appearance that made age irrelevant. Could have been 35, could have been 50. Hard to tell when someone's face had been carved by wind and sun and whatever personal demons kept them company at night. "Fine," he said after a long moment. "Cook breakfast. Riley could use the help anyway." It wasn't permission, it was dismissal. Evelyn took it as victory. Matien? Riley turned out to be a 60-year-old former cavalryman with a bad leg and worse attitude. He limped into the kitchen at 4:45, saw Evelyn already working, and stopped dead. "The hell are you?" "Evelyn Mercer. I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are. The charity case from Missouri with the broken kids." The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn's hand stilled on the pan she'd been heating. "My children are not broken. The girl doesn't talk. The boy looks like a strong wind would snap him. I've seen broke before, lady. I know what it looks like." She wanted to throw the pan at his head, wanted to scream that her children had survived losing their father, survived poverty and hunger and 1,000 miles of brutal travel, survived landing in a place where old men felt entitled to judge them. Instead, she said, "I can cook for 30 men without help, but if you'd rather do it yourself, I'll step aside." Riley stared at her for a long moment, then grunted and moved to the stove. "Make the biscuits. I'll handle the rest." They worked in hostile silence, moving around each other like fighters in a ring, waiting for the first real blow. But the biscuits came out perfect, light and flaky, the way her mother had taught her. And when the ranch hands filed in at 5 sharp, the food was ready. Evelyn served alongside Riley, filling plates, pouring coffee, invisible in the way women often were in spaces dominated by men. The ranch hands ate without looking at her, without thanking her. just shoveled food into their mouths and left, all except Coulter, who paused at the door and said, "Biscuits were good." Then he was gone. Riley made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That's the most he's talked to anyone in 3 months. You should feel honored." Evelyn didn't feel honored. She felt exhausted. She fell into a routine without anyone asking her to. Woke before dawn, cooked breakfast, returned to the storage room to wake the children. Clara would help her with small tasks, folding blankets, organizing their few possessions. Eli would disappear to follow the ranch hands around, desperate for male attention, for someone to teach him how to be the man his father never got the chance to show him. The afternoons were hers. Riley didn't want help with the midday meal. "I've been doing this for 10 years without some woman reorganizing my kitchen." So Evelyn wandered the ranch, looking for purpose. She found it behind the main house. Someone had tried to grow vegetables once. The remnants of a garden stretched across a patch of land that had clearly been abandoned for years. Dried stalks stood like grave markers. The soil was hard-packed and gray, choked with weeds. But there was a pump nearby. And the land got good sun. And Evelyn knew how to make things grow even when the world insisted they should die. She started the next day, attacking the dead garden with a broken hoe she'd found in the storage room. The blade was rusty, the handle cracked, but it worked well enough. She hacked at the weeds, turning over soil that hadn't been touched in years. It was brutal work. Her hands blistered within an hour. Her back screamed. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes, soaking through her dress. She kept going. Clara appeared at midday, settling onto the ground nearby without speaking. She pulled weeds with small, careful hands, making piles of dead plants like offerings to some forgotten god. "We'll plant carrots," Evelyn said, more to herself than her daughter. "Potatoes. Maybe beans if the season's not too far gone. Tomatoes won't make it, but we could try lettuce." Clara didn't respond, just kept pulling weeds. They worked until the sun began its descent, turning the sky the color of a healing bruise. Evelyn's hands were bleeding by then, torn open by the hoe handle and thorns, and her own stubborn refusal to stop. When they finally quit, she looked at what they'd accomplished. Maybe 10 square feet of cleared ground, a pathetic amount considering the hours they'd invested. But it was something. It was a start, thick. The ranch hands noticed on the third day. Evelyn was digging in the garden when she heard voices, looked up to find 3 men standing at the fence, watching her like she was performing some incomprehensible ritual. "What's she doing?" one of them asked. "Hell if I know. Digging for gold, maybe." "Ain't no gold in that dirt. Nothing but rocks and rattlesnakes." They laughed, the sound carrying across the yard like mockery made audible. Evelyn straightened, wiped her face, and stared at them until they got uncomfortable and walked away. That night at dinner, Riley said, "Heard you're trying to resurrect the garden." "Yes." "It won't work. Mrs. Boone tried for 3 years before she died. Nothing ever grew right. Soil's no good." "Then I'll make it good." Riley snorted. "With what? Wishful thinking?" "With whatever it takes." The old cook studied her across the kitchen, something shifting in his expression. Not quite respect, but maybe the recognition that stubbornness came in many forms, and Evelyn's particular brand might be strong enough to bend reality. "There's manure behind the barn," he said gruffly. "If you're serious about this fool project, work it into the soil. Might help, might not, but it's there if you want it." It was the first genuinely helpful thing anyone had said to her since arriving. "Thank you," Evelyn said. Riley turned back to his cooking, but she saw him smile. By the end of the second week, Evelyn had transformed a quarter of the garden. The soil was still hard, still reluctant, but it was better, darker. It smelled like earth instead of death. She planted seeds she'd traded for in town, a 5-mile walk each way, carrying Eli on her back when he got tired, Clara trailing behind like a silent ghost. The general store owner had looked at her with pity, offering prices she couldn't afford until she mentioned she was staying at the Boone Ranch. Then his entire demeanor changed. He gave her the seeds for half price, threw in some extra, asked if Coulter was doing all right these days. She had no idea. Coulter barely spoke to her, barely seemed to notice she existed beyond the meals she helped prepare. But people in town knew him, respected him, maybe feared him a little. She filed that information away. The first real confrontation came at the end of week 3. Evelyn was washing dishes after dinner when one of the ranch hands, a mean-looking man named Pike, cornered her in the kitchen. "You need to leave," he said. She didn't stop washing. "Excuse me?" "You and your broke kids. You need to pack up and get out. You're bad luck." "Bad luck?" "Yeah, ever since you showed up, things have been going wrong. Lost 2 calves to a cougar, found rot in the north pasture fence. Riley cut his hand bad enough to need stitches. Bad luck follows desperate people, and you're about as desperate as they come." Evelyn turned to face him, hands dripping soapy water onto the floor. Pike was bigger than her, stronger, meaner. In another life, she might have been afraid, but she'd already lost everything that mattered. Fear felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. "Cougars were killing calves long before I arrived," she said quietly. "Fence posts rot because wood rots, not because a widow and her children exist nearby. And Riley cut his hand because he's 60 years old with shaking hands and poor eyesight. None of that has anything to do with me. You don't belong here." "Maybe not, but I'm staying anyway." Pike stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate her. "Coulter's too soft to throw you out himself, but the rest of us aren't blind. You're using him. Using this ranch, taking charity you got no right to. I work for everything we have. I cook, I clean, You dig in the dirt like a crazy woman and drag your weird kids around like pets. It's disturbing. You're disturbing." The words found their target. Evelyn felt them sink in, felt the old shame rise up, the voice that whispered she was failing her children, failing Daniel's memory, failing at everything that mattered. Then Clara appeared in the doorway. Her daughter stood there, silent as always, staring at Pike with an expression Evelyn had never seen before. Not fear, not sadness, rage, pure, uncomplicated rage burning in a 9-year-old's eyes. Pike noticed her, shifted uncomfortably. "What's she looking at?" "You," Evelyn said. "She's looking at a bully who picks on women and children because he's too much of a coward to face actual problems." His face darkened. "You want to watch your mouth, or what? You'll hit me? Prove you're exactly what I just called you?" They stared at each other, the kitchen heavy with potential violence, and Evelyn realized she didn't care. Let him hit her. Let him throw her out. She was so tired of being afraid, of being small, of apologizing for existing. "Pike." Coulter's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stood in the doorway behind Clara, face expressionless. "Get out." "Boss, I was just out." Pike left, shoving past Clara hard enough to make her stumble. Evelyn caught her daughter, pulled her close, felt the small body trembling. Coulter watched Pike disappear into the night, then turned to Evelyn. "He bother you again. You tell me." "I can handle—" "You tell me," he repeated. "I don't tolerate that behavior on my ranch." Then he was gone too, leaving Evelyn standing in the kitchen with her daughter, wondering if that was protection or just property management. But the garden started growing. It shouldn't have worked. The soil was still terrible. The climate was unforgiving, and Evelyn had no business succeeding where Coulter's wife had failed. But tiny green shoots began pushing through the earth like small miracles, defying expectations. Carrots first, then beans. The potato plants came up strong and healthy, spreading leaves like they'd been waiting years for someone to give them permission to live. Evelyn tended them every day, hauling water from the pump until her shoulders ached, pulling weeds before they could choke out the fragile new growth. Clara helped without being asked, moving through the rows with careful attention, treating each plant like it mattered. The ranch hands still didn't talk to her much, but they stopped with the outright hostility. Riley started leaving tools for her: a better hoe, a rake with all its teeth, a spade that actually cut through hard soil. He never mentioned it, just left them where she'd find them. And Coulter watched. She'd catch him sometimes, standing on the back porch with his morning coffee, staring at the garden like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. When she'd look up, he'd turn away, disappear back into the house. But the next day, the fence around the garden would be repaired, or the pump would work more smoothly, or someone would leave a bag of better soil by the gate. Small things, wordless things, things that might have meant nothing, or might have meant he was paying attention. August bled into September. The heat eased, replaced by cooler nights, and the first hints of changing seasons. The ranch settled into autumn routines, preparing for winter, moving cattle to lower pastures, stockpiling supplies. Evelyn learned the rhythms, learned which men to trust and which to avoid, learned that Tommy, definitely Tommy, not Timmy, was sweet on a girl in town but too shy to talk to her, learned that Riley had nightmares about the war and drank too much to quiet them, learned that Coulter's wife had died giving birth to a stillborn son and he'd shut down emotionally in ways that might be permanent. She learned that the ranch was struggling. Not dying, exactly, but not thriving either. The men worked hard, but there was an aimlessness to it, like they were going through motions without believing in outcomes, like they'd forgotten what success looked like. One evening after dinner, she found Coulter in the barn, working on a saddle by lamplight. He didn't acknowledge her presence, just kept stitching leather with steady, practiced movements. "The garden's producing," Evelyn said. "I noticed. Enough that I could start preserving, pickles maybe, some of the beans, if there's space in the root cellar." "There's space?" She waited for more. Nothing came. "Your wife tried to grow vegetables," she said. His hands stilled. "Yes." "It didn't work for her." "No." "Why do you think it's working for me?" Coulter set down the saddle, finally looked at her. In the lamplight, his face seemed older, more tired. "Because you're desperate. Catherine wanted a garden because it seemed like something a ranch wife should have. You need it because your children have to eat. Desperation makes things grow that politeness never could." It was the most he'd ever said to her at once. "Is that why you let us stay?" Evelyn asked. "Desperation? I let you stay because family is family, even when it's distant and inconvenient." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." She studied him, this hard, closed-off man who'd given her a storage room and nothing else but somehow kept making sure she had what she needed. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be." "Don't confuse practicality with kindness, Mrs. Mercer." "I won't confuse kindness with obligation, Mr. Boone." Something almost like a smile crossed his face, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. He picked up the saddle again, returned to his work, and she understood she was dismissed. But as she walked back toward the house, she heard him say, "The pickles. Catherine used to make them with dill. There's some growing wild near the creek." She smiled in the darkness, filed the information away with all the other small kindnesses he pretended not to give. The first frost came early in October. Evelyn woke to find the world transformed, covered in delicate ice that turned everything silver. She rushed to the garden, expecting devastation, but found that someone had covered the sensitive plants with burlap during the night. Riley claimed ignorance. The ranch hand shrugged. Coulter was conveniently absent. She harvested what was ready, worked through the day preserving and storing, teaching Clara how to prepare vegetables for winter storage. Eli helped carry baskets, proud to be useful, still following the ranch hands around when he wasn't needed elsewhere. That night she made pickles using wild dill from the creek. The next morning she left a jar on Coulter's porch. It was gone by afternoon. October turned mean. Not winter yet, but the warning shot. Cold rain swept across the ranch, turning the ground to mud, making every task twice as difficult. The men worked in miserable conditions, coming back soaked and exhausted. Evelyn started heating water for baths, leaving it ready in the bunkhouse. Started making bigger meals, heavier food that stuck to ribs and fought off the cold. Started mending clothes without being asked, fixing the small things that made hard work harder. She didn't announce these things, didn't ask for thanks, just did them, because she understood that earning your place meant making yourself indispensable. The men noticed, started greeting her in the mornings, started asking if she needed help with anything, started treating her less like an intruder and more like, she wasn't sure what. Not family, exactly, but not an outsider anymore either. And then, on a rain-soaked October morning, everything changed. Tommy collapsed during breakfast. One minute he was eating, the next he was on the floor, convulsing, burning with fever so intense Evelyn could feel the heat radiating off him from 3 feet away. The ranch hands panicked. Someone shouted about getting the doctor, but the nearest doctor was in Lewiston, 2 days' ride in good weather. In this rain, maybe 3. Tommy would be dead by then. Everyone knew it. She could see it in their faces, the resignation, The acceptance that sometimes men just died and there was nothing to be done about it. "Get him to the bunkhouse," Evelyn said. No one moved. "Now!" she snapped, and suddenly everyone was moving, lifting Tommy, carrying him through the rain to his bed. Evelyn followed, her mind racing through everything her mother had taught her about fevers, about sickness, about keeping people alive when death was reaching out to claim them. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. She sent Eli to the garden for willow bark, sent Riley to boil water, stripped Tommy down and began the awful work of fighting a fever that wanted him dead. The hours blurred together. Cold cloths on his forehead, replaced when they turned hot. Willow bark tea forced between his lips a spoonful at a time, checking his breathing, his pulse, the color of his skin. He got worse before he got better. Started shaking so violently she thought his bones might break. Then went still, so still she pressed her ear to his chest to make sure his heart was still beating. The ranch hands gathered in the doorway, watching, waiting for death to do what it always did. Coulter appeared at dusk, soaked from working in the rain. He stood beside Evelyn without speaking, just watching her work with an expression she couldn't read. "He might not make it," she said quietly. "I know. If the fever doesn't break by morning, I know." But she kept working anyway, kept changing the cloths, forcing the tea, willing this boy, because that's what he was, just a boy who'd shown her the storage room and called her ma'am, to keep breathing. Midnight came and went, 1 in the morning, 2. At 3, Tommy's fever broke. Evelyn felt it happen, the heat receding like a tide going out. She checked his pulse, still strong, his breathing steady and deep. He was going to live. She sat back, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how much her body hurt, how close she'd come to losing this small battle against a world that kept taking things from her. Coulter's hand appeared in her vision, offering to help her up. She took it, let him pull her to her feet, and for a moment they just stood there, her hand in his, both of them looking at the sleeping boy who would wake up tomorrow alive. "Thank you," Coulter said. "Don't thank me. Thank willow bark and stubbornness." "I'll thank you anyway." He walked her back to the storage room through the rain, neither of them speaking. At her door he paused. "What you did tonight, anyone would have—" "No," he interrupted. "They wouldn't have. They would have prayed and prepared for a funeral. You fought instead." "I've had enough funerals," Evelyn said quietly. He nodded, understanding passing between them without words. Then he turned and disappeared into the rain, leaving her standing in the doorway, watching him go. Inside, Clara and Eli were asleep, curled together for warmth. Evelyn stripped off her wet clothes, wrapped herself in a blanket, and lay down beside her children. For the first time since Daniel died, she felt something other than despair. She felt useful. The next morning, Tommy was awake and asking for food. The ranch hands treated Evelyn differently after that. Not with warmth, exactly. These were hard men who'd learned not to trust easily. But with respect, the kind earned through action rather than granted through politeness. Riley started asking her opinion on meals. The men stopped talking over her when she spoke. Pike still glared at her, but he kept his distance. And Coulter began appearing in strange places, working near the garden when she was there, checking on the children when they played in the yard, sitting on the porch in the evenings, drinking coffee and watching the sunset like he was waiting for something. She caught him one evening, gathering the courage to ask what he wanted. But before she could speak, he said, "Winter's coming early this year. Can feel it." "How early?" "Bad early. We'll need to start preparing now." "What do you need me to do?" He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. "Whatever you've been doing, just keep doing it." It wasn't a declaration, wasn't poetry or romance or any of the soft things women were supposed to want, but it was acceptance. And right then, that was enough. The first snow fell 2 weeks later. The snow came down like a punishment, not the gentle, picturesque kind that made children excited. This was the kind that buried fence posts overnight, that turned the world into something unrecognizable and hostile. Evelyn woke to find 3 inches already on the ground, and according to Riley, who'd lived through 40 Montana winters, this was just the beginning. "Storm's got teeth," he said, staring out the kitchen window while Evelyn started breakfast. "The kind that don't let go once they bite down. She looked past him at the white landscape, at the way the snow had erased all the familiar markers of the ranch. The garden was gone, buried. The path to the bunkhouse was already filling in, despite men having walked it just an hour before. How long will it last? Riley shrugged, but his face told her everything she needed to know. Too long. Longer than anyone wanted. Coulter came in shaking snow from his coat, his face red from wind. He poured coffee with hands that trembled slightly from cold, then stood by the stove like he was trying to absorb heat through proximity. Cattle? Riley asked. Moving them down from the high pasture. Should have done it last week. Coulter's voice carried self-recrimination. Thought we had more time. Weather don't care what you thought. Yeah. Coulter drank his coffee in silence, staring at nothing. Then he looked at Evelyn. You'll need to bring more firewood inside, as much as you can fit in that room, and extra blankets. Check the storage trunk upstairs. How bad is this going to get? He met her eyes, and she saw something in his expression that scared her more than the snow. Bad enough that I'm telling you to prepare now instead of waiting. The ranch hands filed in for breakfast, stomping snow off their boots, complaining about the cold in the casual way men did when they wanted to pretend they weren't worried. But Evelyn could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they ate faster than usual, like they knew comfort was about to become a luxury. Tommy, fully recovered now, though he still tired easily, sat beside her while she served. Ma'am, Mr. Boone wants me to help you move firewood after breakfast. You should be resting. I'm fine. And it's not a request. He lowered his voice. He's worried about you and the kids. Won't say it, but I can tell. Evelyn glanced at Coulter, who was deep in conversation with two of the older ranch hands mapping out work assignments. He didn't look in her direction, but she remembered his hand helping her up after Tommy's fever broke, remembered the way he'd started appearing wherever she happened to be. Worried. Maybe. Or maybe just practical, like he always claimed. After breakfast, Tommy helped her haul wood from the massive pile behind the barn. They made trip after trip, stacking logs in the storage room until there was barely space to walk. Clara and Eli helped, carrying smaller pieces, their breath coming out in white clouds. That should last you a while, Tommy said, surveying their work. If it don't, there's more in the barn. But you shouldn't go out in a storm. Send one of us instead. I'm not helpless. No, ma'am, you're not. But Mr. Boone would skin me alive if something happened to you because I didn't make things clear. There it was again. That protective instinct that Coulter wouldn't acknowledge but couldn't seem to help. The snow kept falling. By midday, it was 6 inches. By evening, close to a foot. The temperature dropped so fast that the windows in the main house started frosting over from the inside. Evelyn made stew for dinner, thick and heavy, the kind of food that fought against cold. She'd learned to stretch ingredients, to make a little meat go a long way when combined with potatoes and carrots. From the garden she'd fought so hard to grow. The men ate in silence, too cold and tired for conversation. After dinner, she found Coulter on the back porch, staring at the buried garden. Nothing will survive this, she said, joining him. No. He didn't look at her. First winter Catherine was here. She planted bulbs, tulips, I think. Spent hours getting them just right, talking about how beautiful they'd be in spring. Snow came early that year, too. Killed everything. It was the most he'd ever said about his wife. Evelyn waited, sensing there was more. She cried for 3 days. I didn't understand why it mattered so much. They were just flowers. But she said they were supposed to be proof that beautiful things could exist here, that this place wasn't just survival and suffering. Did she ever try again? No. After that, she stopped trying to make this place into something it wasn't. Evelyn looked at the buried garden, at all the work she'd done, now hidden under snow. I'll replant in spring. Coulter finally turned to her. Why? Because giving up is how you die inside before your body catches up. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. You're not like her. Catherine, I mean. Should I be? No. He said it firmly. No, you shouldn't. The wind picked up, blowing snow across the porch in swirling patterns. Coulter moved toward the door, then paused. Storm's going to get worse before it gets better. You need anything, you come find me. Don't wait. Don't try to handle it yourself, understand? It wasn't a suggestion. I understand. He nodded and disappeared inside, leaving her alone with the snow and the wind and the strange warmth of knowing someone was watching out for her, even if he'd never say it plainly. That night, Evelyn piled every blanket they owned onto the children and slept in her coat. The cold seeped through the walls, turned their breath visible even inside. She lay awake listening to the wind howl, wondering how people survived winters like this, wondering if she was strong enough to see it through. She thought about Daniel, about the last winter they'd spent together in that drafty apartment in St. Louis. He'd been sick even then, though neither of them wanted to admit it. They'd huddled together for warmth, making plans for a future that would never come. She missed him. Not just the man he'd been, but the safety of believing someone would take care of things, that she wasn't alone in fighting every single battle. Then she thought about Coulter standing in the snow, checking on cattle, making sure everyone had what they needed. Different from Daniel in every way that mattered, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe survival required a different kind of strength than love did. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that screamed like something dying, of snow that fell so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. The men took shifts checking on the cattle, coming back half frozen, barely able to speak. Evelyn kept coffee going around the clock, kept the stove burning, kept food ready whenever someone stumbled in from the cold. The ranch house became a refuge. Men who normally slept in the bunkhouse started sleeping on the floor by the fire, too cold to make the dangerous walk back. The kitchen stayed occupied day and night, bodies pressed together for warmth, everyone too miserable to care about personal space. Clara stayed close to Evelyn, helping in small ways, still silent but present. Eli attached himself to Tommy, following the young ranch hand everywhere, asking endless questions about horses and cattle and what it took to survive out here. On the second night, Pike cornered Evelyn in the hallway while she was carrying blankets. "This is your fault," he said. "She was too tired for this. The weather is my fault. Bad luck follows you. I told you that. Should have listened. Get out of my way." "Or what? You'll run crying to Coulter? He's too busy trying to save the herd to care about your set." "Pike!" Coulter's voice cut through the dim hallway. He emerged from his room, still pulling on a shirt, face dark with anger. "You got something to say to me?" Pike went pale. "No, boss. Just making conversation." "Conversation." Coulter moved closer, and Evelyn saw Pike actually step back. "With a woman trying to do her job while you block her way and blame her for weather patterns. That what you call conversation?" "I didn't mean—" "You're on night watch, all 3 nights, alone." "Boss, that's not fair. You want to argue about fair? Do it outside, in the cold, where you'll be spending the next 72 hours anyway." Pike opened his mouth, saw the expression on Coulter's face, and thought better of it. He pushed past Evelyn, grabbed his coat, and disappeared into the storm. Coulter stood in the hallway, breathing hard, jaw clenched. Evelyn waited for him to say something, to explain the overreaction, to make it about ranch discipline instead of what it obviously was. He didn't. Just looked at her and said, "He bothers you again. I'll do worse than night watch." "You don't have to." "Yeah, I do." He went back to his room and closed the door, leaving Evelyn standing there with an armful of blankets and a heart that felt dangerously close to something she couldn't afford to feel. The storm finally broke on the 4th day. The wind died, the snow stopped, and the sun came out like it had never been gone. The world was transformed, white and clean and so bright it hurt to look at. The men emerged from the house like survivors of a shipwreck, blinking in the light, assessing the damage. 3 cattle were dead. 2 sections of fence were down. The roof of the old barn had partially collapsed under the weight of snow. It could have been worse, but it was bad enough. Coulter organized work crews, sending men out to deal with the most urgent problems. Evelyn watched from the kitchen window as they scattered across the ranch, moving through snow that came up to their knees in places. "We lost 30 head the winter Catherine died," Riley said, appearing beside her. "Thought the ranch might not survive it. Coulter almost didn't survive it." "What changed?" "Time. Stubbornness. Same thing that keeps most people alive when they got no good reason to be." He limped away to start lunch, leaving Evelyn to wonder about the man who ran this ranch, who'd lost a wife and child and still got up every morning to fight against a world that kept trying to crush him. She understood that kind of stubbornness. She was living it. That afternoon, she bundled the children in every warm thing they owned and let them play in the snow. They needed it, needed to be children instead of quiet shadows pressed against walls. Clara made a snowman with Eli's enthusiastic help, both of them laughing in the way kids did when they forgot to be traumatized. Evelyn stood on the porch watching them, and for just a moment let herself believe they might actually be okay. Then she saw Coulter riding back from the north pasture, his horse moving slow through the deep snow. Even from a distance, she could tell something was wrong. He sat wrong in the saddle, hunched over, holding his side. She was moving before she made the conscious decision, running through the snow, shouting his name. He looked up, seemed surprised to see her, then his eyes went unfocused, and he started to slide sideways. Evelyn reached him just as he fell, barely managing to break his fall, both of them going down in the snow. He was conscious, but barely, face gray with pain. "What happened?" "Horse spooked. Threw me into a fence post." His voice was tight, each word an effort. "Might have broken something." "Can you stand?" "Not sure I want to try." Tommy appeared, having seen the commotion from the barn. Together they got Coulter on his feet, or tried to. He made it halfway up before his left leg gave out, and he nearly went down again. "Definitely broken," he gasped. "Son of a—" "Save it," Evelyn cut him off. "Tommy, help me get him inside." They half-carried, half-dragged Coulter to the house, leaving a trail through the snow. Riley took one look at them and started clearing the kitchen table. "On his back," Evelyn ordered. "Carefully." They laid him out on the table like a body prepared for surgery. Coulter's face had gone from gray to white, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "This is embarrassing," he muttered. "Shut up." Evelyn was already cutting away his pant leg with kitchen shears, revealing a leg that was swollen and discolored. She'd seen broken bones before. Daniel had broken his wrist once, and her brother had shattered his collarbone falling from a barn loft. This looked bad. "Someone needs to ride for the doctor," she said. "Can't." Riley gestured at the window. "Look at that snow. Even if a horse could make it through, it'd take 2 days to reach Lewiston. 2 days back. He'd be dead or healed by then." "Then we set it ourselves." Everyone in the kitchen went silent. Coulter opened his eyes, looked at her like she'd suggested amputation. "You know how to set a broken bone?" "I watched my father do it once, and I've read about it." "Read about it. Do you have a better suggestion?" He stared at the ceiling, breathing through the pain. "Riley, get the whiskey. The good stuff, not the swill we give the hands." Tommy was sent to find wooden slats for a splint. One of the other ranch hands produced clean strips of cloth. Evelyn washed her hands until they were raw, trying to remember everything she'd ever seen or read about broken bones. The leg needed to be straightened. The bone needed to be aligned. If she did it wrong, Coulter could end up crippled. If she didn't do it at all, infection would set in, and then he'd die the way men died on the frontier, slowly and painfully, while everyone watched. "You ever done this before?" Coulter asked, taking a long pull from the whiskey bottle. "No." "Fantastic," another drink. "You got steady hands?" "Steadier than yours right now." Something that might have been a laugh escaped him. "Fair point." He handed her the bottle. "You should drink too. Might help." "I need to be clear-headed." "Then drink after. You're going to need it." She positioned herself at his leg, hands hovering over the injury. The swelling made it hard to see exactly where the break was, but she could feel it when she pressed gently. The bone shifted wrong, not lined up the way it should be. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I know. I mean really hurt." "Evelyn." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw actual fear in his eyes. Not of the pain, she realized. Of being dependent. Of being vulnerable. "Just do it." She gripped his leg, feeling for the break, and pulled. Coulter made a sound she'd never heard from a human throat. His back arched off the table, every muscle going rigid. Riley and Tommy held him down while Evelyn worked, feeling the bone grind and shift, trying to find the right alignment. "Almost there," she whispered, more to herself than him. "Almost—" The bone clicked into place. Coulter went limp, unconscious from the pain. Evelyn's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the splint Tommy handed her, but she forced herself to keep going. Positioned the wooden slats. Wrapped the cloth tight enough to stabilize, but not so tight it would cut off circulation. When she finished, she stepped back and immediately vomited in the bucket Riley had thoughtfully placed nearby. "That," Riley said, "was the most terrifying thing I've ever watched. And I was at Bull Run." Evelyn wiped her mouth, looked at Coulter's unconscious form on the table. His breathing was steady. His color was better. The leg was straight and splinted. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Get him to his bed, she told Tommy. Carefully. Don't jar that leg. They carried him upstairs while Evelyn cleaned the kitchen, washing away the blood and sweat and whiskey, trying to stop her hands from shaking. Clara appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. Is he going to die? The question hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Her daughter hadn't spoken in months, and the first words she chose were about death. No, baby, he's going to be fine. You promise? Evelyn looked at her daughter, at the fear in those young eyes, and she lied. I promise. Clara nodded and disappeared, apparently satisfied with the answer, even though they both knew promises didn't mean anything when it came to keeping people alive. That night, Evelyn sat beside Coulter's bed, monitoring his breathing, checking the splint, watching for signs of fever. Riley brought her coffee around midnight. You should sleep, he said. I will. Later. He'd do the same for you. She looked at the old cook, saw the knowledge in his eyes. Would he? He already has. Who do you think's been making sure you had everything you needed? Who fixed the pump? Who covered your garden plants before the frost? Wasn't me. And it wasn't the ranch hands. Man's been taking care of you since the day you arrived, just too stubborn to admit it. Riley left her alone with that information and a fresh pot of coffee. Coulter woke around 3 a.m, disoriented and in pain. Evelyn gave him water, more whiskey, talked him through the panic of finding himself injured and helpless. The leg? He asked. Set. Splinted. You need to stay off it for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks? That's not possible. It has to be possible, unless you want to be crippled permanently. He closed his eyes, and she saw him doing the math. 6 weeks of winter. 6 weeks of not being able to run the ranch, not being able to check on cattle, not being able to do any of the 1,000 things that kept this place functioning. Riley can handle things, she said, and Tommy, between them, it's not their job. It is now. Evelyn, you don't have a choice, she said firmly. You're injured. You need to heal, and that means letting other people take care of things for a while. He stared at her like she'd suggested something impossible. And maybe for him it was. Maybe he'd spent so long being the one who handled everything that he'd forgotten how to let someone else carry the weight. I'll watch over things, she added quietly. Make sure nothing falls apart. You? Me. Riley. Tommy. All of us. You built something here, Coulter. Built it strong enough that it can survive you being human for 6 weeks. He didn't argue. Just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, then closed his eyes and fell back asleep. Evelyn sat in the chair beside his bed, listening to him breathe, and wondered when exactly she'd started caring whether this hard, closed-off man lived or died. The ranch adjusted to Coulter's absence the way bones adjusted to breaks, painfully, but with surprising resilience. Riley took over the daily operations, running things with military efficiency. Tommy stepped up, showing leadership nobody knew he had. The other ranch hands worked harder, like they were trying to prove they could handle things without the boss watching. And Evelyn became the liaison between Coulter's room and the rest of the ranch. She'd check on him every few hours, reporting what was happening, asking questions about decisions that needed to be made. At first, he tried to micromanage everything from his bed, giving detailed instructions about tasks the men had been doing for years. But gradually, as the days passed and nothing catastrophic happened, he started to relax, started to trust. The fence in the north pasture is fixed, she told him one afternoon. Tommy says it's stronger than before. Did he use the good posts or the cheap ones? Does it matter? It's done, it's solid, and the cattle are safe. Coulter made a frustrated sound. I should be out there checking it myself. You should be healing, which is what you're doing. He glared at her, and she glared right back. This had become their routine, him pushing against the restrictions of injury, her pushing back harder, neither of them willing to give ground. You're enjoying this, he accused. Enjoying watching you suffer? No. Enjoying having a legitimate reason to tell you what to do? Maybe a little. That almost smile appeared again, gone so fast she might have imagined it. You're a terrible nurse. You're a terrible patient. I'd say we're even. The infection started on day 4. Evelyn recognized it immediately. The fever, the swelling around the splint, the way Coulter's skin took on an unhealthy flush. She'd been checking the wound twice daily, keeping it clean, but apparently it wasn't enough. "We need to remove the splint," she told Riley. "Clean the wound properly." "That's going to hurt him." "Not as much as dying from infection." They did it while Coulter was lucid because he insisted on being conscious, on seeing what was happening to his own body. Evelyn unwrapped the splint carefully, revealing skin that was red and swollen, weeping fluid from several points. "That looks bad," Coulter observed, his voice tight. "It's not good." She cleaned the wound with water so hot it steamed, with whiskey, with every remedy she knew. Applied poultices made from herbs Riley found in the medicine cabinet. Re-splinted the leg with fresh cloth. Then she sat beside him and waited to see if it would be enough. The fever climbed through the night. Coulter alternated between shivering and sweating, sometimes delirious, sometimes clear enough to apologize for being difficult. "You're not difficult," Evelyn told him during one lucid moment. "You're injured and fighting infection. That's not the same thing. Still, you didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for any of this. But here we are." He looked at her with eyes that fever had made too bright. "Why are you still here? Really, you could have left by now. Taken the children somewhere easier." "There is nowhere easier, and even if there was—" She paused, surprised by what she was about to say. "I don't want to go." "Why not?" "Because I'm tired of running," she thought. "Because my children are starting to heal here. Because I've worked too hard on that garden to abandon it. Because you make me feel like survival might be worth the effort." What she said was, "Because this is home now, whether you like it or not." Coulter closed his eyes, but she saw him smile. "I like it. More than I probably should." The fever broke 3 days later. Evelyn woke in the chair beside his bed to find him watching her, clear-eyed and breathing normally. "You look terrible," he said. "You look alive. I'll take it." She checked the wound. The swelling was down, the redness fading. The infection was retreating. He was going to make it. Relief hit her so hard she had to sit down. "Hey." Coulter's voice was gentle. "I'm okay." "I know." "Then why are you crying?" She hadn't realized she was. Evelyn wiped her face roughly, embarrassed. "I'm tired. I cry when I'm tired." Liar. She looked at him, this man who'd given her a storage room and slowly, quietly, given her everything else she needed to survive. "I thought I was going to lose another person. I'm tired of losing people. I'm not going anywhere." "You can't promise that." "No," he agreed, "but I can promise I'm not dying from this. You fixed me too well." She laughed, the sound coming out more like a sob. "I'm a terrible doctor." "You're an amazing doctor and a terrible liar, and probably the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "That sounds like a compliment." "It is." They stared at each other, something passing between them that neither was ready to name. Then Clara appeared in the doorway, breaking the moment. "Mama, Eli fell in the snow and now he's crying." Evelyn stood, wiped her face again. "I should go," Coulter said. "I'll still be here when you get back." And he was. He was there every day after that, slowly healing, slowly learning to let people help him, slowly becoming something other than the cold, distant man who'd met her at the door all those months ago. The ranch survived Coulter's injury. More than survived. It thrived. The men discovered they were capable of more than they'd given themselves credit for. Tommy found confidence he didn't know he had. Riley rediscovered the part of himself that had led men into battle. And Evelyn found something she'd stopped believing existed. A place where she mattered. Where her work meant something, where her presence made a difference. 6 weeks after the injury, Coulter took his first steps without the splint. He was shaky, weak, but the leg held. He made it across the room and back, then sat down heavily, exhausted from the effort. "How does it feel?" Evelyn asked. "Like I've been lying in bed for 6 weeks. "That's because you have been." He flexed the leg experimentally. "It's good work. The setting, the healing, you did good work." "We did good work, all of us." "Yeah." He looked at her. "We did." Outside, the snow was still falling, but lighter now, gentler, the kind that would melt when spring finally arrived. And sitting in that room with Coulter, watching him heal, Evelyn let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to make it through this winter alive. She was wrong about making it through. The real winter arrived in December like something with a grudge. The snow that had fallen in November was nothing compared to what came after. Blizzards rolled across the ranch in waves, each one worse than the last, burying everything under layers of ice and wind that cut through clothing like knives. Coulter was back on his feet but moving slow, the legs still weak, still healing. He pushed himself anyway, limping through the snow to check on cattle, to reinforce structures, to do all the things a ranch owner did when winter was trying to murder everything he'd built. "You're going to re-injure that leg," Evelyn told him one morning, watching him struggle into his coat. "Probably." "That's not reassuring." "Wasn't trying to reassure you, was trying to be honest." He paused at the door. The herd scattered across 3 pastures. Half the water troughs are frozen solid. We've got maybe 2 weeks of hay left if we're lucky. Being careful with my leg isn't exactly the priority right now. She wanted to argue, to tell him that killing himself through stubbornness wasn't going to save the ranch. But she'd seen the numbers Riley had shown her, had heard the conversations late at night when the men thought she was asleep. The ranch was in trouble. Real trouble. "Be careful anyway," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. Then he nodded and disappeared into the white hell outside. The supplies started running low 2 weeks before Christmas. Coffee went first, which made everyone miserable. Then sugar, then flour. Riley stretched what they had, making meals out of increasingly creative combinations, but even his skills couldn't multiply nothing into something. "We'll need to slaughter another cow," he told Evelyn while they worked in the kitchen. "Can't spare it, but we also can't let everyone starve." "How many have we lost already?" 12. Maybe 15 by now. Hard to get accurate counts in this weather. Coulter's hoping we can save most of the herd, but he trailed off, the silence saying what words couldn't. They might lose everything. That night, Evelyn inventoried everything in the storage room. 3 cans of vegetables she'd put up in the fall, a sack of potatoes, half of them starting to sprout, some dried beans, a few strips of jerky that had seen better days. Not enough. Not nearly enough if this winter lasted as long as Riley predicted. Clara sat on the bed watching her count and recount, as if different numbers would appear through sheer willpower. "Are we going to starve?" her daughter asked quietly. Evelyn's hand stilled on a can of beans. Clara had been speaking more over the past few weeks, short sentences that came out hesitant and careful, like she was relearning a language she'd once known fluently. "No, baby, we're not going to starve." "You always say we'll be okay, but sometimes you're wrong." The truth of it hit hard. Evelyn sat down beside Clara, pulled her close. "You're right. Sometimes I am wrong. But I'm not wrong about this. We're going to survive this winter." "How do you know?" "Because we have to. Because there's no other option." It wasn't a good answer, but it was the only honest one she had. Christmas came and went without celebration. There was no money for gifts, no ingredients for special food, no energy for pretending everything was festive and bright. The men worked through the day like it was any other, fighting against cold and snow and the slow starvation of the herd. Evelyn made stew from the last of the potatoes and a piece of meat so small it barely qualified. She stretched it with water and hope, serving portions that wouldn't satisfy anyone but were all they could spare. Eli cried that night quietly, trying to hide it. He was hungry in the way children got hungry when their bodies were growing and there wasn't enough food to feed that growth. Evelyn gave him half her own portion the next day, and when Coulter noticed and gave her a look, she stared him down until he let it go. The men were hungry too. She could see it in their faces, in the way their clothes hung looser, in the exhaustion that went beyond just physical labor. They were burning through their reserves, and winter was nowhere near done with them. On New Year's Day, the worst blizzard yet rolled in. Evelyn watched it approach from the kitchen window, a wall of white that blotted out the sky. The temperature dropped so fast that the water in the bucket beside the stove developed a skin of ice within an hour. "Everyone inside," Coulter ordered, limping from room to room. "No one goes out for any reason. I don't care what you hear, what you think needs doing. You stay inside until this passes." The ranch hands crowded into the main house, bringing what blankets and supplies they could carry from the bunkhouse. 15 men plus Evelyn and the children, all packed into a space meant for maybe half that number. The storm hit an hour later. The wind was the worst part. It didn't just blow. It screamed. A constant howling that made conversation impossible and sleep unthinkable. The house shook with each gust, and Evelyn found herself wondering if the walls would hold, if the roof would stay attached, if they'd all be buried alive in snow and splintered wood. The temperature inside the house dropped until their breath came out in clouds. Evelyn piled every blanket she could find on the children, then helped Riley organize the men around the 2 stoves they were running constantly, feeding them furniture when the firewood ran low. "We're burning the dining chairs," Riley shouted over the wind. "Burn whatever keeps us alive," she shouted back. They burned chairs. They burned a broken cabinet. They burned fence posts that had been stored in the basement. The men huddled as close to the heat as they could get, and it still wasn't enough. Fingers went numb. Toes lost feeling. One of the older ranch hands started showing signs of frostbite despite being inside. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind and cold, and the slow realization that they might actually die here, all of them, frozen in a house that was supposed to be shelter. Food ran out on the 2nd day. They melted snow for water and pretended it was filling. Some of the men stopped talking, just stared at the stoves with blank expressions, retreating inside themselves the way people did when reality became too much. Evelyn kept moving, kept checking on people, redistributing blankets, making sure the children stayed warm, forcing the men to drink water even when they didn't want to. She worked on pure, stubborn refusal to let winter win, and when Coulter caught her swaying on her feet from exhaustion, he physically picked her up and made her sit down. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse," he said. "Neither are you." She gestured at his leg, which he'd been favoring badly. "You're limping worse than before." "It's fine." "It's not fine. You've been on it too much, pushing too hard." "Evelyn." He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel heat radiating from his body. "We're all pushing too hard. That's what survival looks like." She wanted to argue, but she was too tired. Instead, she leaned against him, just for a moment, stealing his warmth. He went still, like he didn't know what to do with the contact, then carefully put his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that while the storm raged outside, neither speaking, both too exhausted for words. Clara found them that way an hour later. She looked at them, at the way her mother was tucked against Coulter's side, and something shifted in her expression. Not disapproval, something else, something that might have been relief. "Eli's cold," she said. Evelyn straightened immediately, fatigue forgotten. "Where is he?" "By the window. He wanted to see outside." She found her son pressed against the frost-covered glass, shivering violently. His lips had a blue tint that made her heart stop. "Eli, baby, you need to move away from the window." "I can't feel my hands, Mama." She pulled him away from the cold, wrapped him in her own blanket, started rubbing his hands to restore circulation. They were ice cold, the fingers stiff and unresponsive. "Coulter!" she called, hearing the panic in her own voice. He was there immediately, taking in the situation with one look. "Bring him to the stove. Riley, move those men back. We need space." They surrounded Eli with warmth, with bodies, with desperate hope that they hadn't waited too long. Evelyn held her son and watched his face for signs of improvement, for color returning, for anything that said he was going to be okay. Slowly, painfully, feeling returned to his hands. He cried from the pain of it, from the burning sensation that came with warming frozen flesh. Evelyn held him through it, murmuring reassurances that felt like lies. "He's going to be fine," Coulter said quietly, crouching beside them. "His hands aren't frostbitten, just cold. He'll be okay." He was at that window for maybe 10 minutes. "I know." 10 minutes, and he almost... She couldn't finish the sentence. Coulter put his hand on her shoulder, squeezed once. "But he didn't. He's okay. You got to him in time." She looked at him, at the steadiness in his eyes, and chose to believe him because the alternative was unbearable. The storm finally ended on the 4th day. The wind died as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. Evelyn stood at the window watching the sun rise over a landscape that barely resembled the ranch she knew. Snow had buried everything, fences, buildings, anything less than 6 feet tall. The men emerged from the house like ghosts, pale and shaky, staring at the destruction with hollow eyes. Half of them had frostbite. All of them were weak from hunger and cold and days of breathing air that barely qualified as warm. "Check the cattle," Coulter ordered, his voice rough from disuse. Whatever's left of them. And the hay stores. I need to know what we're working with. Tommy and 3 others set out, moving slowly through snow that came up to their waists in places. They were gone for hours. When they came back, Tommy's face told the story before his words did. We lost 40 head. Maybe more buried under snow we can't see yet. The hay barn roof collapsed. Most of what we had is either buried or ruined. 40 cattle, half the herd, and almost no food to keep the rest alive through what remained of winter. The ranch hands looked to Coulter, waiting for him to say something, to fix this, to pull a miracle out of thin air the way leaders were supposed to do. He stood there silent, and Evelyn saw something she'd never seen before, defeat in his eyes. Just for a moment, but it was there. The realization that this might be the disaster that finally broke him, broke the ranch, broke everything he'd built. Then he straightened, and the moment passed. We search for more hay, anywhere it might be stored, anywhere it might have drifted and survived. We dig out what we can from the collapsed barn, and we ration what's left. The cattle that are weakest get culled now, before we waste resources trying to save them. Boss, if we cull the weak ones, we won't have enough breeding stock for next year, Tommy said carefully. If we don't cull them, we won't have any cattle at all. Make the calls. Do it quick. The men dispersed to their grim tasks, leaving Coulter standing in the snow, staring at nothing. Evelyn approached him carefully. We'll get through this. Will we? We have to. He looked at her, and the exhaustion on his face was almost painful to see. I'm not sure wanting to survive is enough anymore. It has to be, because it's all we have. The next week was a nightmare of constant work and diminishing hope. The men dug through snow looking for buried hay, finding some but not enough. They slaughtered the weakest cattle, salvaging what meat they could. Riley turned the meat into meals that stretched further than seemed possible, but even his skills couldn't make nothing into plenty. Evelyn watched the ranch slowly starving and felt helpless in ways she hadn't since Daniel died. She rationed their personal supplies down to almost nothing, giving most of what they had to the children, then watching Eli and Clara share those portions with the barn cat that had somehow survived the storms. They're too kind for this world, Riley observed one evening, watching Clara sneak food to the cat. Or exactly kind enough, Evelyn said. Maybe kindness is how you stay human when everything's trying to make you hard. Maybe. Or maybe it just gets you killed. She didn't have an answer for that. January dragged on, each day colder than the last. The men stopped talking much, conserving energy, retreating into themselves. Fights broke out over nothing, a perceived slight, an unfair portion of food, the way someone looked at someone else. Coulter broke them up with increasing frustration, his own temper fraying under the weight of keeping everyone alive. Evelyn found him in the barn one night, just sitting in the dark, not even pretending to work. You should be inside where it's warm, she said. It's not warm inside. Warmer than here. He didn't respond. She sat down beside him in the hay, both of them silent for a long moment. I'm losing it, he said finally. The ranch. I can feel it slipping away, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. You don't know that. I do. I've seen it before. This is how it starts. One bad winter, supplies run out, the herd dies, and suddenly you're bankrupt and losing everything to the bank. My father lost his ranch this way. I swore it wouldn't happen to me. It won't. You can't know that. No, Evelyn admitted, but I can believe it anyway. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light from the house, she saw everything he normally kept hidden. Fear, exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of fighting battles you weren't sure you could win. Why? He asked. Why do you believe? Because if I stop believing, what's left? Despair? That's just another way of dying. Maybe dying would be easier. Maybe, but we're not going to find out. She stood, offered him her hand. He stared at it for a moment, then took it, letting her pull him to his feet. They walked back to the house together, neither speaking, and Evelyn wondered how much longer any of them could keep going. The answer came 3 days later. Tommy burst into the kitchen during breakfast, face flushed with excitement. There's a deer, caught in a drift about a mile north. Still alive, but stuck. If we can get to it... The men moved as one, grabbing coats and rifles, suddenly energized by the possibility of real food. Coulter led the expedition despite his leg, moving through the snow with single-minded determination. They were gone for 4 hours. When they came back, they were dragging a deer that had frozen to death before they could reach it. But it was fresh, unspoiled, a miracle of timing and luck. That night, for the first time in weeks, everyone ate until they were full. The smell of roasting meat filled the house, and the men laughed, actually laughed, telling stories and making jokes like they were human again instead of just survival machines. Evelyn sat with the children, watching them eat, and felt tears streaming down her face. Clara looked up, concerned. "Why are you crying, Mama?" "Because I'm happy." It was true. For the first time in so long, she was genuinely happy. Not hopeful, not cautiously optimistic, but actually happy. They'd survived. They were still here, still fighting. Coulter caught her eye from across the room, and she saw the same emotion reflected in his face. Relief. Gratitude. The fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd turned a corner. The food from the deer lasted a week, carefully rationed. Riley made stew, roasted the meat, boiled the bones for broth. Nothing was wasted. And while they ate, the men's spirits lifted, their energy returned, the constant edge of desperation eased just enough to breathe. Then another storm hit. This one was shorter, only a day, but it brought temperatures so cold that water froze in the pipes inside the house. One of the ranch hands developed pneumonia. Another cut his hand badly while chopping ice and nearly bled out before they could stop it. Evelyn moved through the house like a ghost, tending wounds, checking on the sick, keeping the stoves burning, functioning on will alone because her body had given up trying to convince her it needed rest. She was changing the pneumonia patient's compress when she heard shouting from downstairs. Then a crash. Then Coulter's voice, loud and angry, in a way she'd never heard before. She found him in the kitchen with Pike. The two of them squared off, Pike's nose bleeding, Coulter's fist clenched. "What happened?" "He stole food," Coulter said, voice deadly calm. "From the stores. Extra rations while everyone else is starving." Pike wiped his nose, defiant. "I was hungry." "We're all hungry. You don't get to take more than your share because you're weak." "I'm not weak. Coulter hit him again, and Pike went down hard. "Get out. Pack your things and get out. You're done here." "You can't throw me out in the middle of winter." "Watch me." Riley appeared in the doorway, took in the scene. "Boss, he'll die out there." Then he should have thought about that before stealing from his crew. Evelyn stepped between them, hand up. "Coulter, wait. This isn't your concern." "It is if you're about to commit murder." "He committed theft. During a winter that might kill us all anyway. That's unforgivable." She looked at Pike, at the blood on his face, at the fear in his eyes. He was an awful person, mean and petty and cruel. But he was also starving and desperate and terrified. "Lock him in the storage room," she said. "My old room. Give him reduced rations for the rest of winter. Make him earn his way back." "Evelyn, killing him makes you worse than he is. Punish him? Fine. But don't become something you can't come back from." Coulter stared at her, breathing hard, fists still clenched. For a long moment, she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd throw Pike out anyway and damn the consequences. Then he turned to Riley. "Lock him up, half rations. He complains once, he's out in the snow." Riley nodded, grabbed Pike, hauled him away. The other ranch hands dispersed, the entertainment over. Evelyn stayed, watching Coulter unclench his fist, watching the anger drain away, leaving only exhaustion. "You should have let me throw him out," he said quietly. "No, I shouldn't have." "Why do you care? He's been awful to you since the day you arrived." "I don't care about him. I care about you, about what killing him would do to you." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something passed between them that felt dangerous and necessary all at once. "You're too soft for this place," he said, "and you're not soft enough. Maybe we balance each other out." He laughed, a sound so unexpected it startled them both. "Maybe we do." February arrived with marginally better weather. The storms were still brutal, but shorter, with brief periods of calm between them. The sun appeared more often, and though the cold never really eased, it became more bearable. The ranch had survived January. Barely. But it was still standing, the cattle were still alive, and the men were still functional. It felt like a victory even though they'd lost so much. Evelyn stood in the kitchen one morning, watching the sunrise paint the snow gold, and let herself believe they might actually make it. Winter couldn't last forever. Spring would come eventually. And when it did, they'd rebuild everything they'd lost. Coulter appeared beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." "Worried?" "Always. But less than before." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light change, and Evelyn realized this moment, this quiet, simple moment, was what she'd been fighting for all along. Not grand victories or dramatic rescues, but the ability to stand beside someone and watch the sunrise and believe tomorrow might be better. "Evelyn," Coulter said quietly. "Yes?" "When this is over, when winter's done and we've made it through, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Tell me now." "No, later, when we've earned it." She wanted to push, to demand answers, but she understood. Some things needed to be said after the battle, not during it. "Okay," she said. "Later." He smiled, a real smile, and squeezed her hand once before walking away to start his day. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, holding on to that moment of warmth and prepared to face whatever came next. Later came faster than either of them expected. The final storm of winter hit in late February, but it was different from the others. Shorter, less vicious, like winter had finally exhausted itself and was making one last half-hearted attempt before giving up entirely. When it cleared after 2 days, the temperature rose above freezing for the first time in months. Water dripped from icicles. Snow began to melt in patches, revealing brown grass underneath like a promise of things to come. The men emerged from the house looking less like survivors of a war and more like people who might actually have a future. Riley stood on the porch, breathing deep, eyes closed, face turned toward the weak sun. "It's over," he said. "Don't jinx it," Tommy warned. "Could still get another storm." "No, it's over. I can feel it. Winter's done with us." Evelyn wanted to believe him, but she'd learned not to trust hope too quickly. Hope was fragile, and winter had taught her that fragile things broke when you leaned on them. But the next day was warmer, and the day after that. And slowly, carefully, she let herself believe that maybe Riley was right. Maybe they'd actually survived. The ranch began the slow work of recovery. The men dug out from under the snow, assessed the damage, started planning repairs. Coulter could walk without limping now, the leg fully healed, though Evelyn noticed he still favored it when he was tired. She caught him one afternoon inspecting the fence line near her buried garden, and the sight of him standing in the sunlight instead of the constant gray of winter made something in her chest tighten. He saw her watching and waited for her to approach. "Garden's going to need a lot of work," he said. "Everything's going to need a lot of work." "Yeah." He turned to face her fully. "About what I said. Before. About needing to tell you something." Her heart started beating faster. "I remember. We made it. Through winter. We earned it." "Earned what?" He took a breath and she saw nervousness in his expression, which was somehow more terrifying than any storm. Coulter was never nervous. "I want you to stay. Not because of obligation or charity or because you're useful. I want you to stay because—" He stopped, frustrated with himself. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "At saying things that matter. Catherine used to say I had all the romantic sensibility of a fence post." Evelyn felt herself smile despite the tension. Fence posts are very practical. I like practical. "This isn't about practical. This is about—" He stopped again, then apparently gave up on eloquence. "I love you. I'm in love with you. Have been for months, maybe since you saved Tommy, maybe before that. And I know it's complicated because you're still grieving Daniel and I'm still a mess from losing Catherine and the timing is probably terrible, but I needed you to know." The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Evelyn stared at him, her mind blank of everything except the single truth she'd been avoiding all winter. She loved him too. Somewhere between the storage room and the garden and watching him heal from a broken leg, she'd fallen in love with this hard, complicated man who'd given her everything while pretending to give her nothing. "Say something," Coulter said, and she heard actual fear in his voice. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Love someone again. I barely knew how to do it the first time. Daniel and I, we were children when we married. We grew up together. This is different. You're different. I'm different. I don't know the rules anymore. Then we make new ones. What if I'm not ready? Then I wait. She looked at him, at the absolute certainty in his eyes, and felt something break open inside her. Not grief this time, something else, something that felt like permission to want things again. I loved my husband, she said carefully, but he's gone. And I'm still here. And you're here. And I think, she paused, gathering courage, I think I love you too. I know I do, but I'm scared. Of what? Of losing someone again. Of building something just to watch it get destroyed. Of being happy and having it ripped away. Coulter stepped closer, close enough to touch, but not touching yet. I can't promise you won't lose me. People die. Ranches fail. Bad things happen to good people all the time. But I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay alive, to keep this place running, to give you and those kids the life you deserve. We don't deserve anything. Life doesn't work that way. Maybe not, but I'm going to act like it does anyway. She reached for him then, putting her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong under her palm. He covered her hand with his, and they stood like that while the snow melted around them and the world slowly came back to life. So what now? She asked. Now we take it slow. Let you get used to the idea. Let the kids get used to it. I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn. I can be patient. You're terrible at being patient. Then I'll learn. For you. She smiled, and he smiled back, and it felt like the beginning of something that might actually last. The kiss happened 3 days later. Evelyn was in the garden, or what used to be the garden, assessing the damage. Most of the plants were dead, frozen beyond recovery, but a few had survived, the hardier vegetables protected by the snow itself. She was digging carefully around a potato plant when Coulter appeared beside her. Need help? I need a miracle. This garden is destroyed. You'll rebuild it. You're good at rebuilding things. She sat back on her heels, looked up at him. Am I? You rebuilt me. You weren't that broken. Yes, I was. I just hid it well. He knelt beside her in the mud and melting snow, not caring about his clothes, and Evelyn saw everything he normally kept locked away. The loneliness, the grief. The years of pretending he was fine when he was falling apart. Catherine's been gone 5 years, he said quietly, and I've been dead almost as long, just going through motions, keeping the ranch running because I didn't know what else to do. Then you showed up with your broken kids and your stubborn pride, and suddenly I had a reason to care again. Coulter, let me finish. You saved Tommy that night, but you saved me too. Saved all of us. Not with grand gestures or dramatic rescues, just by being here, by refusing to give up, by making us all believe that survival was worth the effort. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special. You just don't see it. He reached up, touched her face with muddy fingers, and she leaned into the contact like a starving thing. Can I kiss you? He asked. Yes. It was nothing like the kisses in the romance novels she'd read as a girl. It was awkward and tentative, both of them out of practice, both of them scared of doing it wrong. But it was real, and it was theirs, and when they pulled apart, Evelyn felt like she'd crossed some invisible line into a future she'd stopped believing existed. That was, she started. Terrible, he finished. We'll get better at it. She laughed, the sound coming out shaky and raw. Promise? Promise. They went back to examining the garden together, shoulders touching, and Evelyn let herself imagine what spring would bring. New plants, new growth, a new life built on the ruins of everything they'd lost. The ranch hands noticed the change between them immediately. Men who'd spent months living in close quarters didn't miss much, and the way Coulter started finding excuses to be near Evelyn, the way she smiled differently when he was around, it was obvious to anyone paying attention. Tommy cornered her in the kitchen one morning while she was starting breakfast. So, you and the boss, are we that transparent? Ma'am, a blind man could see it. Question is, are you happy? The question surprised her. Why do you ask? Because Mr. Boone's been alone a long time, and you've been through hell. Just want to make sure you're doing this because you want to, not because you feel obligated. I'm not good at doing things out of obligation. Ask anyone. Tommy grinned. Fair point. Then I'm happy for you both. We all are. Even Pike, though he'd never admit it. How is Pike? Miserable, which is what he deserves. But he's alive, which is more than he'd be if you hadn't stopped the boss from throwing him out. Everyone deserves a second chance. Not everyone, but maybe Pike does. We'll see. Riley released Pike from the storage room a week later, making it clear that one more infraction would result in permanent expulsion. Pike emerged thin and subdued, the fight knocked out of him by weeks of isolation and reduced rations. He sought out Evelyn the next day, found her hanging laundry in the weak March sunshine. "I need to say something," he said, not meeting her eyes. She waited, hands full of wet clothes. "I was wrong. About you. About the kids. About everything. You're not bad luck. You're probably the only reason most of us are still alive." "Pike, let me finish. I don't expect you to forgive me. I was awful to you from day one, and you saved my life anyway. That's—" He stopped, struggling. "That's not something I know how to repay." "You don't have to repay it. Just be better." "I'll try." It wasn't a friendship. Wasn't even really reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement, which was more than she'd expected. March turned into April, and the world transformed. Snow melted into rivers of runoff. The grass came back tentative and green. The cattle that had survived began gaining weight again, grazing on fresh growth, looking less like walking skeletons. Evelyn replanted the garden with seeds she'd saved and new ones traded for in town. Clara helped without being asked, working beside her mother with increasing confidence. The silence that had defined her daughter for so long had lifted completely, replaced by a quiet thoughtfulness that sometimes erupted into actual conversation. "Do you love him?" Clara asked one afternoon while they were planting carrots. Evelyn's hands stilled. "Who?" "Mr. Boone. Do you love him?" "Yes, I do. Does that bother you?" Clara considered this, her face serious. "I thought it would. I thought loving someone else meant you didn't love Papa anymore." "No, baby. It doesn't work that way." "How does it work?" Evelyn sat back, trying to find words for something she barely understood herself. "Love doesn't run out. It doesn't replace other love. It just adds. Your Papa will always be your Papa. Nothing changes that. But Mr. Boone is here, and he cares about us, and it's okay to care about him back." "Even though Papa's only been gone a year? Even then, your Papa wouldn't want us to be alone forever. He'd want us to be happy." Clara nodded slowly, processing this. "Eli already calls him Coulter instead of Mr. Boone. I heard him yesterday. How do you feel about that?" "I don't know yet, but I think it's probably okay." It was the most mature thing Evelyn had ever heard her 9-year-old say. She pulled Clara close, kissed the top of her head. "You're allowed to take your time figuring it out. Are you going to marry him?" The question caught her completely off guard. We haven't, that's not something we've discussed." "But you will. Maybe. Someday, if—" She stopped, realizing she was talking to her daughter about hypothetical futures when a year ago she'd barely believed they'd survive the week. "Would that be okay with you?" Clara looked at her mother with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "I just want you to stop being sad. You've been sad for so long, Mama. If he makes you not sad, then yes, it's okay." Evelyn felt tears burning in her eyes, but they were the good kind for once, the kind that came from hope instead of grief. That evening, she found Coulter in the barn oiling saddles. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was so open and genuine it made her heart hurt. "Clara asked if we're getting married," she said. His hand stilled on the leather. "What did you tell her?" "That we haven't discussed it." "Is that your subtle way of starting the discussion?" "Maybe. I don't know. Is it crazy to even think about it? We barely—" "Ooh." "Evelyn." He set down the saddle, gave her his full attention. "I've been thinking about it since the day I kissed you in the garden. Probably before that. But I didn't want to push. Didn't want to make you feel pressured into something you weren't ready for. And if I said I might be ready, then I'd ask you properly. Get down on one knee, the whole thing. You don't have to—" "Yeah, I do. Some things should be done right." He stood, then actually got down on one knee in the barn dirt, looking up at her with an expression that was half nervous, half determined. "Evelyn Mercer, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" She stared at him, this man who'd given her a storage room and somehow given her everything else too. A home, a future, a reason to believe that good things could still happen. "Yes," she said. Yes, I'll marry you. He stood and kissed her, and this time it wasn't awkward or tentative. This time they knew what they were doing, knew what they wanted, and the kiss was everything it should be. When they pulled apart, Evelyn was crying and laughing at the same time. When? She asked. Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next month, next year. I'm not going anywhere. Soon, before I lose my nerve. You're the bravest person I know. You don't have a nervous bone in your body. You'd be surprised. They told the children that night. Eli whooped with excitement and immediately started asking if he could call Coulter Pa, which made Coulter's eyes get suspiciously wet. Clara smiled, a real smile, and said she was happy for them. The ranch hands found out by breakfast the next morning, and Riley made biscuits to celebrate, which was his version of throwing a party. Tommy shook Coulter's hand so enthusiastically it looked like he might injure him. Even Pike offered awkward congratulations. When's the wedding? Riley asked. 2 weeks, Evelyn said, surprising herself. That enough time to prepare? For what? You want a big ceremony? No, just something. Something that marks it as real. Then 2 weeks is plenty. They were married on a Sunday in May, in the ranch yard with the mountains as their backdrop. Evelyn wore a dress she'd borrowed from a woman in town, simple blue cotton that had been let out to fit her. Coulter wore his best clothes, which meant the shirt didn't have any holes and his pants were only slightly worn. The ceremony was short. The judge spoke about commitment and partnership and building a life together, which seemed fitting for two people who'd literally built a life from nothing. When it came time for the vows, Coulter spoke first. I'm not good with words, never have been. But I can promise you this. I'll work every day to deserve you, to take care of you and your children, to build something here that lasts. You saved my life, Evelyn. The least I can do is spend the rest of it making sure you never regret it. Evelyn's turn. She looked at this man who'd become her husband, who'd given her everything while claiming to give her nothing. When I came here, I was broken, lost. I didn't believe in second chances or happy endings or any of the things that make life worth living. You gave those back to me, not through grand gestures, but through small kindnesses you thought I didn't notice. You fixed my pump and covered my garden and made sure my children were safe. You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. I promise to build that home with you, to stand beside you through whatever comes next, to love you for as long as I'm alive. The judge pronounced them married, and Coulter kissed her while the ranch hands cheered and Clara tried to hide the fact that she was crying, and Eli shouted something about cake that made everyone laugh. The party lasted into the evening. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else found whiskey that had been hidden for special occasions. The men danced badly, and Evelyn danced with her new husband under the stars, and it felt like magic even though it was just life being kind for once. Later, much later, after the party had wound down and the children were asleep, and the ranch had finally gone quiet, Evelyn and Coulter stood on the porch, looking at their land. Think we'll make it? She asked. We already did. Everything else is just details. That's very optimistic for you. I'm a married man now. Married men are allowed to be optimistic. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arms around her, and they stood like that until the stars began to fade and morning threatened on the horizon. Somewhere behind them, in the garden Evelyn had built from dead soil, something was growing, carrots and beans and potatoes, pushing up through earth that had learned to give life instead of taking it. The ranch had survived winter. They'd all survived. And now, finally, they could start thinking about more than just survival. They could start thinking about actually living. The weeks after the wedding fell into new rhythms. Evelyn moved from the storage room into the main house, into the bedroom that had belonged to Coulter alone for 5 years. The children took the room next door, finally having space and comfort and the security of walls that didn't smell like mildew. The ranch recovered slowly from winter's damage. Fences were repaired. Buildings were reinforced. The herd grew stronger, and Coulter started planning for the future again instead of just surviving the present. Evelyn's garden flourished beyond anyone's expectations. The vegetables came in strong and healthy, producing enough to feed the ranch with surplus to preserve for next winter. Women from neighboring ranches started visiting, asking for advice, trading seeds and stories. She became known in the territory as the woman who could make anything grow, who'd saved the Boone Ranch during the worst winter anyone could remember. The stories grew in the telling until they barely resembled reality, but Evelyn didn't correct them. Let people believe what they wanted. The truth was impressive enough. One morning in late May, Evelyn woke before dawn and slipped out to the garden. The world was quiet, peaceful, the air cool and fresh. She walked through the rows of plants, checking growth, pulling the occasional weed, losing herself in the work. She didn't hear Clara approach until her daughter was standing right beside her. "Mama? Morning, baby. You're up early." "I wanted to help." They worked together in comfortable silence for a while, and Evelyn marveled at how far they'd come. A year ago, Clara wouldn't speak, wouldn't engage, had retreated so far inside herself that Evelyn had feared she might never come back. Now here she was, 13 months after losing her father, working in a garden and talking and slowly becoming herself again. "Mama," Clara said again, and something in her voice made Evelyn stop working. "What is it?" "I don't remember what Papa looked like." The words hit like a punch to the chest. Evelyn sat back on her heels, looked at her daughter's stricken face. "I try to picture him," Clara continued, voice trembling, "but I can't. I know he had dark hair like Eli, and I know he was tall, but I can't see his face anymore. Is that bad? Am I forgetting him?" Evelyn pulled Clara close, held her tight. "No, baby, that's not forgetting. That's just how memory works. The details fade, but the important things stay." "What important things?" "That he loved you, that he would have done anything for you, that he was a good man who worked hard and tried his best. Those things don't fade, Clara. Those things stay forever." "But I want to remember his face. Then we'll talk about him, tell stories, keep him alive that way. And it's okay to love Coulter too. Loving one person doesn't mean forgetting another." Clara nodded against her mother's shoulder, and they sat like that in the garden while the sun rose and the world came to life around them. When they finally went inside for breakfast, Coulter was already in the kitchen with Eli, teaching the boy how to make coffee. Eli was concentrating so hard his tongue stuck out slightly, measuring grounds with exaggerated care. "Morning," Coulter said, looking up at Evelyn with a smile that still made her heart do complicated things. "Morning. What's this?" "Teaching Eli essential survival skills. Can't be a ranch hand if you don't know how to make decent coffee." "I'm going to be the best ranch hand," Eli announced seriously. "Better than Tommy, even." "That's the spirit." Evelyn watched them together, watched the easy affection between her son and her new husband, and felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. This was what she'd fought for. This exact moment. Her children safe and healing. A home that was actually a home. A future that looked like it might include happiness instead of just survival. The coffee turned out terrible. Eli had used way too much grounds. But they drank it anyway, laughing, and it was perfect. The terrible coffee became a tradition. Every Sunday morning, Eli would insist on making it, and every Sunday it would be either too strong or too weak, or somehow both at once. But they drank it anyway, the four of them sitting around the kitchen table like an actual family, and nobody complained because the coffee wasn't the point. Summer arrived in full force by June, and the ranch transformed into something Evelyn had only imagined during those brutal winter months. The cattle grew fat on green grass. The garden produced more than they could eat, more than they could preserve, enough that Evelyn started trading vegetables in town for supplies they needed. The ranch hands worked with renewed energy, no longer just surviving but actually building towards something. Tommy fell in love with that girl in town and got married in July. Pike slowly earned back the trust he'd lost, proving through consistent work that people could actually change if they wanted to badly enough. And Evelyn settled into her new life with the strange disorientation of someone who'd been bracing for disaster so long that happiness felt unnatural. "You're doing it again," Coulter said one evening, finding her on the porch staring at nothing. "Doing what?" "Waiting for something bad to happen." She wanted to deny it, but he knew her too well now. "Can you blame me? Every time things get good, they fall apart." "That's not true. Daniel died right when we were finally getting ahead. The stagecoach abandoned us in the middle of nowhere. Winter almost killed us all. Bad things happen, Coulter. That's just reality." He sat beside her, took her hand. "Good things happen too. You just don't trust them yet." "I'm trying. I know. But you need to actually let yourself be happy instead of just waiting for permission." It was uncomfortably accurate. Evelyn had spent so long in survival mode that she'd forgotten how to do anything else. She knew how to fight, how to endure, how to keep moving when everything was falling apart. But happiness? That was a language she'd forgotten how to speak. How do I do that? She asked quietly. Start small. Let yourself enjoy one thing without analyzing it to death. The garden, the kids laughing, me. He squeezed her hand. Us. She looked at him, at the certainty in his face, and made a decision. She was going to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was going to trust that maybe, just maybe, life could be good for more than temporary moments. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay. I'll try. He kissed her, and she let herself sink into it without thinking about all the ways it could go wrong. The first real test came in August. A man arrived at the ranch asking for Evelyn by name. He was well-dressed, carrying paperwork, and introduced himself as a representative from a law firm in St. Louis. Evelyn's stomach dropped when she saw him. Nothing good ever came from lawyers. Mrs. Boone? He asked. Yes? The name still felt strange, but she was getting used to it. I have news regarding your late husband's estate. Evelyn led him into the house, her mind racing through possibilities. They'd had nothing when Daniel died, no estate to speak of, just debts and broken dreams. The lawyer sat at the kitchen table and pulled out documents. Your late husband's uncle passed away 6 months ago. He left a small inheritance, $300 and some property in Kansas City. We've been trying to locate you for months. $300. It was more money than Evelyn had ever seen at once in her entire life. I don't understand. Daniel's uncle barely knew us. Why would he? Apparently he felt guilty for not helping when your husband fell ill. This was his way of making amends posthumously. The lawyer pushed the papers across the table, showed her where to sign. Evelyn stared at the documents, mind blank. When Coulter came in from the fields an hour later, the lawyer was gone and Evelyn was still sitting at the table, staring at a bank draft for $300. What's that? He asked. She told him. Explained about Daniel's uncle, about the inheritance, about money that had come too late to save her first husband, but had arrived in time to what? She didn't even know. Coulter sat down across from her. That's a lot of money. Yes. What are you going to do with it? The question hung between them, and Evelyn realized this was important. How she answered would tell them both something about who she was now, about whether she'd truly moved on or was still living in the past. I want to use it for the ranch, she said slowly. For repairs. For expanding the herd. For... She looked at Coulter. For our future, not Daniel's past. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or respect. You sure? I'm sure. Daniel would want me to use it for something that keeps us safe. Keeps the children safe. This ranch does that. The ranch is mine, Evelyn. That money's yours. You could use it for anything you want. The ranch is ours, she corrected. We're married. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. That's how this works. He smiled, slow and genuine. Yeah, that's how it works. They used the money to buy breeding stock, to repair the barn properly, instead of with makeshift patches, to hire 2 additional ranch hands for the fall roundup. The investment transformed the ranch from barely surviving to actually prospering. And Evelyn learned something important. Sometimes the past gave gifts, and it was okay to accept them without guilt. September brought unexpected visitors. A woman arrived at the ranch with 2 children, looking exactly like Evelyn had looked a year ago, desperate, exhausted, with nowhere left to go. She'd heard stories about the Boone Ranch, about the woman who'd survived impossible odds, and she'd come hoping for the same chance. Evelyn stood in the yard staring at this mirror image of her former self, and something clicked into place. What's your name? She asked. Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. My husband died 3 months ago. Consumption. I've been traveling since then, trying to find work, Her voice broke. I heard you help people. People like me. Evelyn looked at Coulter, who was watching from the porch. He nodded once, leaving the decision to her. We don't have a storage room anymore, Evelyn said. But there's a cabin about a mile east. Needs work, but it's livable. You can stay there. Help with cooking and preserving, we'll figure out the rest. Sarah's face crumpled with relief. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. Winter here is brutal. You might regret this decision. I won't. I promise I won't. Evelyn showed Sarah to the cabin, helped her get settled, and tried not to cry at the symmetry of it all. A year ago, she'd been the desperate widow. Now she was the one offering shelter. The circle had completed itself in ways she never expected. That night, Coulter found her in the garden, working by moonlight because she couldn't sleep. "You did a good thing today," he said. "I did what someone did for me." "Exactly. You're paying it forward." She sat back on her heels, looked at him. "Do you think that's what life is? Just an endless cycle of people helping each other survive?" "Maybe. Or maybe it's about recognizing that we all need help sometimes, and there's no shame in that." "When did you get so wise?" "I married a woman who taught me things. Some of it must have rubbed off." She threw a dirt clod at him, laughing, and he caught it and threw it back, and they ended up in a ridiculous dirt fight in the garden at midnight, both of them laughing like children. It was the most absurd, undignified, perfect moment of Evelyn's life. October brought the first anniversary of her arrival at the ranch. Evelyn woke on that morning and lay in bed thinking about who she'd been a year ago. Broken. Terrified. Convinced that life was just a series of disasters punctuated by brief moments of false hope. She wasn't that person anymore. Oh, she still had bad days. Still woke up sometimes expecting to find herself back in that storage room with nothing and no one. Still caught herself waiting for disaster. But those moments were getting rarer, replaced by something that felt dangerously close to contentment. "What are you thinking about?" Coulter asked, still half asleep beside her. "That a year ago today I thought my life was over. And now? Now I think it might have just started." He pulled her closer, kissed her shoulder. "Took you long enough to figure that out." They spent the day working, because that's what ranch life was. Endless work punctuated by small moments of joy. But that evening, Coulter surprised her by organizing a dinner. Nothing fancy, just everyone who lived on the ranch gathered in the main house, eating food from Evelyn's garden, telling stories and laughing. Riley made a toast with questionable whiskey. To Evelyn, who showed up with nothing and somehow saved all our sorry hides. "We're better people because of you, better men." Even Pike, though that's a low bar. Pike raised his glass, grinning. "I resent that. But it's true." Everyone laughed and Evelyn felt tears threatening. These rough, hard men who'd barely acknowledged her existence a year ago were now calling her family. It was almost too much. "Speech!" Tommy called out. "I don't do speeches." "Too bad. You're doing one anyway." Evelyn stood, looking around at these faces that had become so familiar. "A year ago, I was convinced I'd made a terrible mistake coming here. This place seemed hostile and cold and completely unwelcoming. Turns out I was right. It was all of those things. But it was also honest. No one pretended to want me here. No one offered false comfort. You just existed. And somehow that was exactly what I needed." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I spent so long looking for safety, for security, for some guarantee that things would work out. But life doesn't give guarantees. It just gives moments. And you have to decide whether you're going to hide from those moments or live them. This place taught me to live them. Winter taught me. Coulter taught me. All of you taught me." "Getting philosophical," Riley muttered, but he was smiling. "I'm almost done. I just want to say thank you for letting me stay, for letting me matter, for becoming," her voice cracked, "for becoming family." Coulter stood and pulled her close, and the room erupted in cheers and applause, and Evelyn let herself cry without shame. Winter came again, as it always did, but this time they were prepared. The barns were reinforced. Supplies were abundant. The herd was strong and healthy. When the first snow fell in November, the ranch hands didn't panic. They just went to work, calm and confident, knowing what needed to be done. And when the storms came, and they did come, brutal and unforgiving, the ranch weathered them without catastrophe. They lost some cattle, but not many. Had some close calls, but nothing they couldn't handle. Made it through to spring with everyone intact and the ranch still prospering. Evelyn stood in her garden the following April, planting seeds for the third year in a row, and marveled at the difference preparation made. Last year, she'd been fighting just to survive. This year, she was planning for abundance. "Mama, can I help?" Clara appeared beside her, 12 years old now, and growing into someone who looked more like Evelyn every day. She'd started speaking regularly about 6 months ago, and now the silence felt like something from another lifetime. Of course. Start with the carrots. They worked together in comfortable rhythm, and Evelyn felt a swell of pride. Her daughter had survived losing a father, survived silence, survived brutal winter and poverty, and everything else life had thrown at her. And she'd come out the other side stronger. "Mama," Clara said after a while, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you ever feel guilty about being happy with Coulter when Papa's only been gone 2 years?" It was the question Evelyn had been asking herself for months. "Sometimes. But then I remember that your Papa loved me, really loved me. And people who really love you want you to be happy, even if they're not around to see it." "I think I'm ready to call Coulter Pa," Clara said quietly. "If that's okay." Evelyn's hand stilled on the dirt. "You don't have to. I know. But I want to. He's been more of a father to me this past year than—" She stopped. "I don't want to say Papa wasn't a good father. Your Papa was a good man who did his best. Coulter's a good man who does his best. You're allowed to love them both. Even though I barely remember what Papa looked like. Especially because of that. Memory fades, Clara. But love doesn't. And making room for new love doesn't erase the old." Clara nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer, and they went back to planting in silence. That night, Clara called Coulter Pa for the first time, asking him to help her with something. He froze, stared at her like she'd just given him the world, then very carefully said, "Sure thing, sweetheart." Later, in bed, he told Evelyn about it, voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd have kids. After Catherine died with our son, I figured that door was closed forever. And now? Now I have 2. And they're perfect. Broken and healing and perfect." "We're all broken and healing," Evelyn said. "That's just what being human is." The ranch continued to grow. Word spread about the widow who could make anything flourish, and people started coming to Evelyn for advice. Not just about gardens, but about surviving loss, about starting over, about finding hope when everything seemed hopeless. She became someone people looked to, someone who mattered beyond just her immediate family. And slowly, carefully, she learned to accept that role without feeling like a fraud. Because the truth was, she'd earned it. Not through some grand heroic gesture, but through the daily, unglamorous work of refusing to give up, through bleeding hands and exhausted nights, and the stubborn insistence that tomorrow might be better. That was the real lesson, she realized. Survival wasn't dramatic. It was boring and repetitive and required doing the same hard work day after day after day. But it was also the most important thing a person could do. Summer arrived with celebrations. Tommy and his wife had a baby, a girl they named Evelyn, which made her cry for an hour. The ranch had its most profitable year ever, and Coulter hired enough hands that the work became manageable instead of crushing. Sarah, the widow Evelyn had helped, found a job in town and moved into a proper house, but came back to visit every Sunday. And on a hot July afternoon, while Evelyn was working in the garden, Clara came running across the yard with news. "Mama, Eli just did something amazing." Evelyn dropped her tools and followed Clara to the corral, where a crowd had gathered. In the center, Eli, now 10 years old and growing like a weed, was riding a horse. Not just sitting on it, but actually riding, controlling it, moving with confidence that shouldn't have been possible for someone so young. Coulter stood at the fence, watching with obvious pride. When he saw Evelyn, he grinned. "Kid's a natural, better than some of my experienced hands." Eli finished his ride and came trotting over, face flushed with excitement. "Did you see, Mama? Did you see?" "I saw. You were amazing. Pa says I can help with the roundup this fall. For real. Not just watching, but actually helping. Pa." Eli had started calling Coulter that months ago, but it still made Evelyn's heart squeeze every time. "That's wonderful, baby." "I'm not a baby anymore," Eli said with all the dignity a 10-year-old could muster. "I'm a ranch hand." Coulter ruffled his hair. "You're a ranch hand in training. Don't get cocky." But he was smiling, and Evelyn saw the love there, the pride, the fatherly affection that Eli had been missing for 2 years. Her children were healing. They'd never forget Daniel. She didn't want them to. But they were building new memories, new connections, new lives that honored the past without being trapped by it. That evening, the 4 of them sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become another tradition, this quiet time together before bed. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. "Tell us a story about Papa," Eli said suddenly. Evelyn glanced at Coulter, who nodded encouragingly. They'd agreed that Daniel would always be part of their family story, never forgotten or erased. "Which one?" "The one about the broken wagon." So Evelyn told the story of how Daniel had tried to fix their wagon wheel and ended up making it worse, and how they'd laughed about it for weeks afterward. She told it with love and humor, keeping Daniel alive in memory without making him a saint. When she finished, Clara added, Coulter, you ever do anything that dumb?" "Oh, constantly. Ask your mother about the time I tried to build a chicken coop." "It fell apart in a week," Evelyn confirmed. "Had to rebuild it from scratch." They laughed together, and it was okay. They could honor Daniel's memory and build their new life at the same time. The two things weren't mutually exclusive. Fall brought the roundup, and Eli got to participate just like Coulter had promised. He worked harder than any of the adult hands, determined to prove himself, and came back exhausted and proud. "I'm going to run this ranch someday," he announced at dinner. "That's a long way off," Coulter said, "but maybe you will." "I will," Eli said with absolute certainty, "and I'm going to make it the best ranch in Montana." "Montana?" Evelyn said. "We're in Wyoming." "Wherever we are, I'm going to make it the best." Clara rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "You're so dramatic. You're just jealous." "Of getting kicked by horses and freezing in blizzards? Yeah, I'm devastated." They bickered good-naturedly, and Evelyn watched them with a full heart. Her children were okay. More than okay. They were thriving. Winter came for the third time, but it had lost its power to terrify. They weathered the storms, kept the cattle alive, made it through to spring with minimal losses. Evelyn's garden came back stronger than ever, producing enough that she started selling vegetables to neighboring ranches and in town. The money went into savings, into improvements, into building something that would last. And in March, 3 years after arriving at the ranch with nothing but 2 children and a broken trunk, Evelyn stood in the garden and realized she was completely, genuinely happy. Not the cautious, waiting for disaster kind of happiness. The real thing. The kind that settled deep in your bones and made you grateful for every morning you woke up alive. Coulter found her there, put his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" "That I spent so long running towards something I thought would make me safe. Better circumstances, more money, different opportunities. But safety isn't a place. It's people. It's choosing to build something and then protecting it with everything you have." "That's very profound for someone covered in dirt." She elbowed him. "I'm serious. I know, and you're right. Safety is people, is family, is knowing that even when things go wrong, you're not facing it alone." "Yeah," Evelyn said softly. "That's it exactly." They stood like that until Clara called them for dinner, and then they went inside together, to the home they'd built from nothing. That night, lying in bed, Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Desperate, broken, convinced her life was over. She wanted to go back and tell that woman that she was wrong. That the worst moment of her life was actually the beginning of the best part. That losing everything would force her to rebuild from scratch, and in doing so, she'd build something better than what she'd lost. But that woman wouldn't have believed her. She'd been too deep in grief, too convinced that happiness was for other people. So maybe the lesson wasn't for past Evelyn. Maybe it was for everyone else out there who thought they were at the end, who thought survival was the best they could hope for. Survival was just the beginning. The real work was deciding what came after, whether you'd stay broken or let yourself heal, whether you'd hide from happiness or let yourself have it. Evelyn had chosen healing, had chosen happiness, and it had been the hardest, most terrifying thing she'd ever done. But it was also the best decision of her life. 5 years after arriving at the ranch, Evelyn stood in her garden, now a full acre of thriving plants, and watched Clara teaching Sarah's children how to plant carrots. Eli was in the corral working with the horses, showing the kind of natural skill that meant he probably would run this ranch someday. Coulter stood beside her, his arm around her waist, both of them watching their life unfold in front of them. "You ever miss Missouri?" he asked. "No, never. Not even a little?" She thought about it honestly. "I miss who I was before grief changed me, but I can't go back to that person. I can only be who I am now." "And who are you now?" Someone who knows that life is hard and unfair and beautiful all at once. Someone who survived winter and learned to trust spring. Someone who... She looked up at him. Someone who's exactly where she's supposed to be. He kissed her, and Clara made exaggerated gagging noises from the garden, and Eli shouted something about the horses, and it was chaos and messy and absolutely perfect. This was what life looked like after survival. Not flawless or easy or guaranteed, just real. Just people loving each other and working hard and building something that might last. And that night, after everyone was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Evelyn stood at the bedroom window, looking out at the land that had become her home. She thought about Daniel, about the life they'd tried to build together, about how it had fallen apart despite their best efforts. "I hope you're okay with this," she whispered to his memory, "with me being happy, with the kids calling someone else Pa. I tried to hold on to grief, tried to honor you by staying broken, but I couldn't. I'm sorry if that makes me weak." The wind moved through the trees outside, and for just a moment, Evelyn let herself imagine it was Daniel's voice telling her what she needed to hear. That love didn't require suffering, that honoring the dead meant living well, that she'd done exactly what she should have done. She'd survived. She'd healed. She'd built a life worth living. And really, what better way was there to honor someone's memory than to refuse to let their death destroy you? Evelyn turned away from the window and climbed into bed beside her husband. Tomorrow, there would be work to do, problems to solve, challenges to face. But tonight, she was going to sleep peacefully beside someone she loved, in a home she'd built, surrounded by families she'd chosen. She'd started with nothing, with less than nothing, and she'd built everything. That was the real story. Not the dramatic moments or the near-death experiences or the big romantic gestures. Just a woman who refused to give up, who learned that sometimes falling apart was necessary before you could rebuild yourself into something stronger. The ranch went on. The garden flourished. The children grew. And Evelyn lived, really lived, for the first time in years. Because survival was never the goal. Life was the goal. And she'd finally learned how to live it.